We all know how disruptive the pandemic has been on our lives, but it's also accelerated the work from home movement, with many families choosing now to work online away from the cities in search of a better lifestyle. Anders Sorman-Nilsson is a well-known futurist and joins me now. Anders, pull me up if I get this wrong, but a futurist takes in data and looks at trends and then makes forecasts. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I tend to describe my profession as either a reverse historian looking at data, or sometimes even as a science fiction author, but for business. So we very much look at data analytics and then do our best to not predict certain outcomes, but rather prepare people and organizations and businesses for alternative future scenarios, both utopias and dystopias.
All right, let's talk about this work from home. Would you call it a revolution? How significant is this?
Well, I think in many ways, the work from home movement had already happened before the pandemic. But really what we've seen, certainly during 2020, is that 10 years worth of digital acceleration have been compressed really into a single year. So these technologies that were already there, whether that was Zoom or Microsoft Teams, just hadn't been adopted to the same extent that they were during 2020. And of course, now we're all attuned to them and adept at using them. And certainly it's liberated us and in many ways sort of digitally untethered us from central business districts around the world. And in many ways, what we've been able to do is to decentralize those business districts back into our homes and our villages instead.
So it sounds like it's here to stay. What impact in the future is this going to have on our towns and cities?
Well, I think you already see in terms of real estate data that whether it's the Mornington Peninsula down in Melbourne or whether it's the northern beaches of Sydney, the people are happy to untether from the central business districts, and certainly real estate values will buoy what I've just said and be a proof point that people are picking up sticks and moving to the type of lifestyle areas that maybe they were prevented from doing before. You're also at the same time seeing that large corporations, for example, Westpac has reduced its footprint in the CBD in Sydney by 25%. Because they just don't see their workforce returning in the same force that they used to be, which of course means that all of this real estate in our CBDs is something up to our imagination to sort of reimagine what it's going to be used for in the future. And I think in the short term, you'll probably see some of those real estate costs falling down over the short term in the cities, which hopefully over the shorter term will enable more creative businesses to actually move in. So we'll still see longer term in what I call the roaring 20s, new creative businesses moving back into the central business districts.
So less suits and more artists kind of heading into the CBDs.
Yeah, more hipster beards in the city soon.
I want to talk to you also about potential of driverless cars in the future. Does that have the potential to significantly change cities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the footprint of cars is one that, has left an enduring impact in terms of how cities have been designed for the last 100 years. And I think once you imagine a city that doesn't need as much parking space, at the moment, a large percentage of those streets is being taken up by cars that are parked. And in fact, in some cities, up to 30% of all traffic is comprised of people and vehicles looking for somewhere to park. So if you imagine a more lean system of traffic management where driverless cars simply come and pick you up, then go back to a depot that's not necessarily in the city, and that's ultra effective, you can imagine all of that parking space being utilized for, say, urban farms or new developments, new residential areas, etc.
Sounds pretty amazing. Countries becoming more self-sufficient through the pandemic, Australia trying to be less reliant on China and make more manufacturing at home. Is this a significant shift that you're seeing here, or is it just a temporary thing and we're just going to go back to the status quo over the past 10, 20 years?
Well, I think what we saw is a sort of a rise of a nationalism, the sort of made in Australia moniker has certainly been something that we've seen in the sort of working from home and the stay-at-home economy, where the likes of Harvey Norman and Domain, for example, are really touting the virtue of, say, Australian-made sofas and couches and beds, etc. You just need to pick up the newspaper to see how that made in Australia is really sort of, drumming up a sort of a national fervor in terms of who we want to support. But I think with the disruption of global supply chains as well, we realize that there's some downsides to globalization and the sort of just-in-time management of goods, and that we have to bring manufacturing back onto our shores to make sure that we are self-sufficient, whether that be in terms of manufacturing or even in our food supply. So the rise of the locavore and sustaining and supporting our local villages and our local communities has really been a trend that I believe is here to stay, as people are supporting the local butcher or the local bakery, etc., and seeing the sort of revival of the local village economy again.
And there's one last question, and it might be a little bit silly. I've seen images and videos on YouTube about people in manned drones flying around with the 4 propellers on each corner. Is there much legs in that? Do you think that's going to take off soon?
Yeah, no pun intended, right? I do believe that small aircraft that are really engineered to move people around is within the near horizon, and there's been certainly some innovations and attempts at this both in Dubai, and there were also some suggestions prior to the pandemic that the Olympic torch would be carried in a drone for part of the segments in a sort of beautiful marrying of man or woman and machine, and I think that is here to stay. Certainly that would solve a lot of last mile issues that we see, whether that be in terms of SES delivering goods and delivering very capable service and emergency personnel in places that are difficult to get to. So I do believe that there's going to be an investment into enabling that sort of technology. So I think in the next 3 to 4 years, that's going to be a sight that we're all going to get used to.
Well, it's so interesting to chat to you. Thank you, Anders, for that. Anders Sorman-Nilsson from Think. Thanks again.
See you in the future.